Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's meeting of Liverpool City Council's Virtual Planning Committee. First of all, on behalf of Liverpool City Council and indeed all members of the committee present today and the officers, we would like to extend our apologies to members, officers and public present, as well as those viewing the live stream. As you can appreciate, some of the software issues which can occasionally occur with virtual meetings, we can occasionally have technical failures as it happened today. So again, thank you everyone for your patience. It's very much appreciated, and obviously we will now start proceedings formally. In terms of the usual technical checks, I'll just briefly confirm that the members can see and hear me okay. So running briefly through members. Chair, can you check in, see and hear us okay?
I can.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Concepcion.
Yes, thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson. Moving on, Councillor Hanson. Thank you, Joe. You're still on mute, but I could see you indicating. Thank you. Councillor McLinden, if you're still online with us.
Yes, still here, Mike.
Thank you, Richard. And again, thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Everything okay, Mike?
Thank you, Billy. That's perfect. Mirna, welcome.
Hi, Mike.
Thank you.
Loud and clear.
Councillor Dunne. Joe Dunne.
Yes, that's all good.
Thank you. Just going back to Councillor Thompson, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. Apologies for that. I just received a phone call on the spur of the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That's much appreciated. That deals with the technical checks. In terms of apologies for absence, we have apologies from Councillors Kennedy and Radford, for which Councillor Dunne is attending as alternate for Councillor Radford. Councillor Dave Cummings is endeavouring to join us somewhat late due to technical issues. Again, that's not for want of trying on his part. So
Michael, I can see Dave on my participants list.
I couldn't see him on mine, Chair. If Dave is present, if he could indicate to me, please. Doesn't seem to be present at this stage, Tricia, in terms of my list of participants. So.
All right, he is on the list of participants.
Thank you, Chair. Noted. At this stage, I can confirm item 14 relating to Overton Street in Picton Ward has been withdrawn from consideration today. That will come forward to a later date in due course, and obviously relevant communications will be issued to members of the public who have expressed an interest to comment and speak on that application. Moving on, are there any declarations of interest from members? No, thank you. Minutes of our last virtual meeting as set out in your agenda. Do members have any comments in relation to the accuracy or content of those? Otherwise, if you could nod your agreement and we'll move on promptly.
Agreed.
Thank you. In terms of urgent items of business, we typically don't have any matters to report for this item. However, on this occasion, we do. Specifically, I remind members back in the latter part of March of this year, on the 31st of March, we adopted emergency provisions under the delegated powers within the City Council Constitution, whereby members were initially consulted and put forward a series of recommendations on applications. These were then affirmed through the delegated decision process and published to our website. One such recommendation, which was number 255, related to land at Blackstock Street and Paul Street, opposite numbers 25 to 31 Blackstock Street. That was in Liverpool 3 in Kirkdale Ward. Now, since the publication of the case officer report at the time, and indeed the publication of those recommendations and subsequent decision, a typographical error has been identified within the documentation, such as whilst the body of the report referred to the correct number of units and the correct disposition, the actual summary of development contained the incorrect number. So your discretion is asked to be exercised as members to apply a typographical correction to that previous record of recommendations. If members are agreeable to that, please nod your assent. Thank you. That's excellent. Moving therefore on to item number 4, the former Norton scrap metal site on Chaloner Street, Flint Street and Parliament Street in Riverside Ward. Chair.
Thank you, Mike. We have 2 speakers here and somebody who can answer questions on heritage. They are allowed up to 5 minutes. I would ask them if they can to be briefer than that. I know it's a very important application, but we've also had a lot of time wasted at the beginning of the meeting. So I am going to cut people off at the end of their time periods. So can I invite Colin Williams first to address us, followed by Phil Jarvis, please.
Thank you, Chair. If you can hear me, committee.
I can hear you clearly, thank you. Colin.
The architect will take you very quickly through the slides, and
Okay,
I'll just highlight a few of the key points, and then we'll
all right,
hopefully
Colin.
quick in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, good morning, Phil.
That's great, thank you. So the site is the former Norton scrap metal site. It's located on the corner of Chaloner Street and Parliament Street in the city centre. To the north, it's bounded by Jordan Street, and it's got Flint Street on the east side. Along Flint Street, we've got an existing 1 and 2 storey vacant building fronting the street, and the site is bounded on all sides by a sort of 2 to 3 metre high wall, which blocks any connection and views in or out of the site to the river and back into the Baltic area. Next slide, please. So this is the ground floor Flint Street level plan, as we call it, and the scheme has been designed primarily to create a connection and an extension of the existing streets within the Baltic. So the Greenland Street connection, which you can just see is the orange dotted line which runs through the public realm, and the new Bed Street connection, which takes you through between the buildings. The site is being set out. We've got 3 separate buildings. We've got Block A, which is the 24-storey tower. We've got Block B, which is a 14-storey building, and Block C, which again is a 14-storey building. To the north, at the top left-hand corner, as you're looking at that screen, we've got a ramped access into 2-level basement car parking area. There's a natural fall across the site from Flint Street down to Chaloner Street of about 6.5 metres. So we've used this to create pavement parking and bin store areas. So as you move through the site, we've got the public realm between the buildings, which grounds all buildings and creates a streetscape there. And it's a continuation of what's already in place in the Baltic market, the Baltic area. You can see the coloured uses within the building. What we're trying to create is a truly mixed use scheme which enhances what's already on offer within the Baltic area. So we've got at lower level, we've got the office space, commercial and leisure uses. We've got gym, we've got some public art gallery spaces. The yellow space, the rectangle between block A and B, is a covered winter garden space. So businesses and leisure facilities within there can have 24-hour access all year round, covered space to socialise and mill out space within there. The space between block B and C is an open space, fully landscaped. Again, we'll provide spill out space, but it's not a covered area. As you move down towards the Parliament Street, Chaloner Street end, we've got a step, cascading steps down to take up that change in level. We've got a drop-off area off Chaloner Street for hotel access, taxi drop-off, collection, etc. In terms of the uses, in block C, the pale blue colour is a hotel use at the front of the site, and we've got some office space, and the brown is residential access and facilities. The purple is commercial spaces, and the red is commercial and gallery spaces. The site is fully accessible. Obviously, we're fully accessible and level access from Flint Street. Access into all the buildings will be fully accessible. We've got 2 external platform lifts to the side of Block C and Block B, which take you down to the mid-terrace level. On that level, we've got public art spaces and exhibition spaces. You can then move across up towards Block A and get level access back onto Parliament Street and down towards the drop-off area. And into the front of the hotel block, the pale blue colour, you can see a ramp which will also take you up from that lower level up to the mid-tier level. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Just quickly to take you through some of the upper floors. So the first floor on the left-hand side is a repeat of some of the uses below, and that covers most of the commercial and office spaces and leisure spaces. When we get to second floor level, we begin to get the residential accommodation, which is a mix of 1 bed, 2 beds, 3 beds, and studio, depending on the building that they're in. And we also have the first level of the hotel accommodation in the pale blue colour on the second floor on the right-hand side. Okay, next slide, please. At 14th floor, we get the roof terraces, the animated roofscape on all blocks. So depending on what use has access to the facility, for the hotel it may be external terrace and lounge area. In Block C, for the residential, we've got potentially allotment space, garden space, and residential communal areas. Again, on Block B, we've got some external residential space on the front and the rear overlooking Flint Street and the river. And Block A, we've got some roof terrace space and allotment space for residents. The plan on the right-hand side just shows you a typical residential floor within the taller building as that moves up. Next slide, please. So at ground floor level, we've got, as I mentioned earlier, a vibrant and active public realm and exhibition space, and we just tried to highlight this on this view. We've obviously got an extensive landscaping scheme. We've got public realm, installation, public art spaces, access into galleries and gyms, etc. off this level. I don't know if you can just make out between the two buildings on the right-hand side, you've got the glazed internal space winter garden. And the images on the top are some of the precedent images of how we envisage these spaces looking with the planted seating areas, again, fully DDA compliant, lighting features, the step seating area and the lighting. Next slide, please. Just highlighting some of the roof level features. I mentioned earlier the active roofscapes in all building. We've got an active roofscapes, again, across all blocks. We've also got a varied roofscape, picking up the features of the Baltic with some of the pitch roofs and flat roofs that we have, a mix of uses in there. And again, at the top, we've just got some of the precedent images of how we envisage these will work, whether it's sort of social spaces, allotment spaces, leisure spaces, places to do some exercise, community gardens. Next slide, please. Obviously, within any scheme within the city, we've had to look at the impact of the scheme within some of the World Heritage Sites key views. We've included here 3 of the main views, really, the ones that have the impact on the cathedral. The view on the left is from the Woodside Ferry Terminal. What we've done on the following 2 views is zoom in so you can actually see what the impact is. On the top view on the right-hand side, our scheme is the white building, just between the blue and the other coloured schemes. The other coloured schemes are the already approved schemes. So that shows the separation between our scheme and the cathedral. I think it's fair to say the cathedral is still, in our view, the dominant feature within that view. The second view down, view 8, is the view from Holt Hill. Again, we follow the same process here. We've zoomed it in on the right-hand side to try and give you a better view of the impact. We are just in the middle of the 2 arrows, the white building sticking up. Again, the cathedral is quite clearly the dominant, what we feel a dominant feature within that view. The third view is view 11, which is from Eastham Country Park. We are on the right-hand side view, the white scheme next to the pale blue scheme. So this shows the clear separation between our scheme and the cathedral. It also shows the additional buildings that are already approved there. It's also worth pointing out that these are all 2D images. So in reality, when you view these, you get a much clearer understanding of the separation between these buildings. Okay, next slide, please. Colin, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. In this slide, we've just listed all the key public benefits and what, as members, you're asked to take into account. You'll see in your officer report, which actually is a very extensive and well-balanced report, we take you all through the issues and policy assessment, and overall the scheme has been assessed against relevant policy both in the UDP and the Emerging Local Plan and the NPPF. It highlights on some of the key impacts, particularly on the Anglican Cathedral.
Ryan, I do need to come in and remind you to start summing up now, please.
Well, now, indeed. So you're asked, you're told by your officers that it is a less substantial impact if that's the view taken, and then you therefore look at the public benefits, and there on that list you see all the public benefits listed. So I hope you would look at that. You'll read, obviously, as you have done the officer report, and support the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Now I'll invite members for questions, and remember also we have Rob Burns with us for questions. He's a heritage specialist. So any questions? Well, we don't seem to have any questions. Can't see anybody indicating. So I'm going to hand over to our case officer now to sum up the issues, and then there'll be a further opportunity for questions. So I think it's over to you, Fergal.
Chair, thank you very much. First, team leader for City Centre Development Management Team. Chair, just a couple of housekeeping items before I go through the main issues. You will see in terms of, there's 2 issues in terms of the table note in front of you. In relation to the recommendation, it's sheet also be subject to payment of £21,389 in respect of public art strategy. This is equivalent of 15% of the application fee. While the applicants have stated that there's going to be an art gallery on site and there's also going to be elements of public art within the overall development, they're still required to contribute towards the council's wider public art strategy throughout the city. And Chair, the second issue is late representations have been received from Councillor Mumby, Ward Councillor for Riverside Ward, which is in the table note in front of you. I'll go through all the issues presently, but Councillor Mumby raises two issues in relation to public open space. You will have seen from the presentation that there's significant large elements of soft and hard landscaping on site, and therefore normally the City Council would ask for a contribution of upwards of 1.88 million in respect of, based on the amount of commercial floor area and the amount of units proposed. In this instance, the applicants have submitted a cost summary of the proposed enhanced public realm provision, which exceeds the cost that City Council would normally require by £1 million. So I'll go through that issue within the report. Councillor Mumby has suggested that we're in instances of where the City Council or the Development Control Subcommittee are proposing to exceed amounts in excess of £1 million, that these costings and the independent consultants report, which are summarised within the officer's report, should be published and provided to the planning committee members to form a judgment and made publicly available also. So that's one thing that members may, obviously that information isn't here for this application. That's one thing that members may wish to consider for the future. I don't think there's an issue with providing members a copy of the full documentation as an annex to the report that they can read. In relation to, Councillor Mumby has also requested that the information is publicly made available, and I would stress to members that quite often a lot of applicants or developers they don't mind sharing the information with the public planning committee. They're loath to share it to a wider audience because it contains somewhat commercial sensitive information relating to prices they paid for materials and land and such like. Councillor Mumby has also raised an issue that he thinks the enhanced public realm isn't as such public realm. It's landscaping works that the developers should be doing themselves, irrespective of requirement for public open space as well. But as I said, I'll go through these issues. Okay, so Chair, you've listened. You've got a very detailed report in front of you, and you've also listened to quite a detailed presentation. Can I ask if we put the presentation back on screen, if that's possible, please? Back to the first page, please. I think there's a couple of images that shows an overview of the site. Yes, thank you very much. So here's the site in question. Right. The site in question, it's surrounded by a 3-metre high wall. It was formerly occupied by Norton for scrap. It's a site that's allocated as the primarily industrial area within the development plan as a mixed-use area in the local plan, which is currently at its examination in public. I think members will be aware of quite a number of planning applications that have been on former industrial land within the Baltic Triangle area, where they're satisfied to print this land is surplus industrial requirements moving forward. It's a prominent brownfield site that has had no activity on it for a number of years. So the principle of redeveloping this site for mixed-use scheme moving forward, I think, is entirely appropriate. Next slide, please, Mike. Then we go on to the overall scale and design of the development. There's 3 separate blocks. There's Block A, which is the one nearest Parliament Street, which is currently 25 stories. Block B, which reduces in scale to 14 stories, and then Block C, which is also 14 stories in height. There's a total of 650 residential apartments being proposed throughout the 3 blocks. A 204-bedroom hotel and some 5,000 of commercial, office and mixed-use space. The scheme, when it was first presented to us in respect of Block A, was substantially higher. It was some 32 stories in height, so it's been considerably reduced in height. Initially, the application met with objections from Historic England. Those objections have been subsequently withdrawn. The scale of Block A has been reduced to 25 stories, so it's comparable in height to X1, which is on the opposite side of Parliament Street. This site is within the kind of southern cluster of tall buildings, which said there's a number of them in close proximity, which are of comparable height. They're subservient to the main cluster, which is around Old Hall Street, the central business district. We're satisfied in terms of the overall scale and height. A development of this size is entirely appropriate. In terms of heritage impact, the site, it's a prominent location. It's within the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site, and it is also in the foreground of views of the Anglican I Cathedral, which is Grade 1 listed. The application has been assessed in terms of the impact upon the World Heritage Site and the impact upon the cathedral. As I said, Historic England initially objected to the application on the grounds of the height of Block A, and it would over-dominate the setting of the cathedral. They've since said further comments in relation to amended scheme. While they've withdrawn their in-principle objection, they do state that in relation to amended scheme, it still causes a moderate level of harm to the Anglican Cathedral, as opposed to considerable harm which was identified previously. This level of harm is less than substantial, and on the less than substantial threshold, it's at the lower end of the less than substantial spectrum. So when I get to the summing up of all the issues involved, I'll touch on balancing the objections that still remain from the kind of heritage officer within the City Council and Historic England against the regeneration benefits that would be brought. Mike, yes, sorry, if you hold on, sorry, Mike, back to the previous slide. You will notice that if you look at the southern boundary of the site, there is a lot of tree planting, and there's also shown that drop-off area. This land at the present moment forms part of the highway that links Chaloner Street into Parliament Street. So it's currently operational highway land. As part of the improvements along the Strand, this is the next phase of it. So within 18 months, that stretch of highway would become surplus to requirement, then would be purchased by the applicants and incorporated within the development site. You will notice outside the boundary, outside the red line, there's a significant amount of tree planting. This is on the southern boundary with Chaloner Street, in the central reservation along Parliament Street, and also on the other side of the highway adjacent to the X1 building. This planting is required to mitigate against increased wind levels that would come in from the River Mersey, and it's the amount of planting that would make the scheme. It's crucial to the scheme to basically, there's there's elderly, children, cyclists, and people, kind of parents walking prams, that are potentially vulnerable to increased winds coming off the River Mersey and circulating along this side. So that tree planting is required to mitigate against those increased wind levels. What hasn't been made clear in the presentation so far, and you may not pick up within the gist of the committee report, is first of all, those highway works, the improved highway works, would have to be carried out to facilitate that area of land to be incorporated within the development. Then all that tree planting would have to take place. This is tree planting that the City Council will not maintain. The applicants will have to maintain it moving on at their own cost. It's only when that tree planting takes place will above ground development take place within the site. So there's conditions restricting above ground building works until the highway works have been carried out, and all those tree planting together with the relocation of stats underneath the site have been relocated. There's issues of parking and highway. I don't know if you want me to speak in respect of them, and also in terms of residential and environmental amenity potential impacts on residents in X1 on the opposite side of Parliament Street. We're some 55 metres away from this site. We're satisfied that there's no issues of loss of light or overlooking of these properties. And there's also concerns raised from late night from Camp and Furnace, who operate on Greenland Street, in respect of the potential impact on their businesses from the residents and future complaints that may arise.
I should just come in here, Fergal, to say that if members have got questions for environmental health or highways, we'll let them come in then, but otherwise we'll leave it to you to do the summing up. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm that there's conditions within the recommendation that address those objections. Coming back onto what Councillor Mumby raised at the outset, there's a significant amount of public, soft and hard public realm landscaping going into this site. The public, as you can see, the site is currently, it's in an island. There's no access through it. Just when you're going from the waterfront up towards the kind of culture area through the Baltic. What is being proposed is it's opening up the site. You can see it allows access from Chaloner Street through the site onto Flint Street and then Greenland Street. Equally so, there's access through Parliament Street linking into the kind of more northern parts of the Baltic. But to facilitate this, the council are effectively waiving 1.9 million of revenue that they potentially would receive in conjunction with policy OE14 on open space provision. There's a requirement of developers, if they can't provide open space on site, which quite clearly they can't in this location, they have to provide £2,000 per unit to provide all sites. So the City Council would either have to maintain or enhance an existing open space provision within walking distance of this site. Chair, we're satisfied that there's no provision off-site that the City Council could enhance, could ensure qualitative improvements, rather than requiring the applicants to spend the money on enhanced soft and hard landscaping on this site. There's no alternative site, and we are happy those figures have been looked at quantitatively, and we're happy that the level of additional provision has been costed out by an independent assessor. Chair, so going on into the balance argument, all the concerns, all the objections raised have been addressed. As I said, the scale of Block A, which was the principal concern, has been reduced in scale, so it's 27 stories. This recommendation is finely balanced. The proposed block, particularly Block A, even reduced in height, would still impact on the dominance of the cathedral. However, the level of harm is less than substantial, and it's on the lower spectrum of less than substantial. And the height of the tower would also impact on the outstanding universal value of the World Heritage Site. Equally so, the level of harm is at a low level. Within paragraph 8.4 of the report, and if Mike, you can move to the last slide, you will see the regeneration benefits that accrue from this development. So paragraph 193 of the National Planning Policy Framework requires you to be minded of impact on kind of heritage and cultural assets, and paragraph 196 states that you assess the potential negative impact on those assets against the regeneration benefits that could accrue from the redevelopment of this site. And as I say, Chair, it's a prominent site within the southern fringe of the city centre. It's remained idle for a number of years. It's never going to go back to its previous use as an industrial area. And we're satisfied that we've got a genuine mixed-use development within this site that's appropriate for the location and overcomes any level of harm that otherwise may arise to the heritage assets. So, Chair, that's you've got a detailed report together with a recommendation that's supported by officers, subject to Section 106 agreement and subject to the numerous conditions attached to the recommendation.
Thank you very much to our case officer. We did have a very full report as well, but do I have any questions from members now? Councillor Juarez.
Thank you, Chair. My concern is with regards to the statements by the heritage and with regards to Historic England. They advise that even though this scheme has been amended, it would still have an impact on the cathedral, and it would still have an impact on the World Heritage status and the skyline. Did you say previously that we had a heritage specialist on this meeting this morning?
We have Rob Burns with us. I did invite questions for them earlier, but we can invite him to comment if you've got a specific question, Councillor Juarez.
Yes, my question is, in his view, how does he feel with this revised scheme, and if he could enlighten us as a committee as to what the effects would be should we approve this application today?
So we've had a request for Rob Burns, who's a heritage specialist, to comment on what his feelings are about the development and how it would impact on the cathedral and World Heritage status. If you'd like to come in, Rob.
Chair,
Yes.
to leave for personal reasons. So.
Oh, I see. So, Councillor Juarez, to be clear, I did invite questions for the presenters. That was the architect, agent, and heritage specialist before. I don't know if you'd like me to ask our case officer to comment.
Yes, please.
So, Fergal, can I invite you to try and comment on the matter, please?
Chairman, I thought I had commented already.
So did I.
Yeah, perhaps I hadn't. There is concern still raised by the Heritage Officer and Historic England. Historic England recognised that the overall scale of the development has come down considerably. It is also recognised that within this site it's inappropriate for a tall building because it's within the kind of southern cluster of secondary tall buildings within the city. They do raise some concern in terms of it will, when viewed along the skyline, you will sitting adjacent to the Anglican Cathedral. It doesn't affect the overall setting of the cathedral. They recognise that the level of harm is less than substantial, and at the less than substantial, it's at the lower end of the less than substantial. It's no higher than a building that sits on the opposite side of Parliament Street. So recognising the level of harm, you've got to assess that against the potential regeneration benefits, which have been identified. The applicants have brought down the scheme considerably in height. I think it's got to a stage now, if it came down any further, it would be lower than what's on the opposite side of the road. And the applicants could quite legitimately say, well, why did you allow a scale of development on that side of the road and on this side of the road, which is near the city centre? It's not considered appropriate. So we're satisfied that the concerns of the Heritage Officer and Historic England have been addressed as far as practical, Chair.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Joe, did I see you putting your pen up? Joe Hanson?
Yeah, we have three further indications of questions from Councillor Hanson, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Hanson.
Right, well, that's not coming up on my screen, Michael. I've got no yellow hands raised. So can we have Councillor Hanson first, please? Councillor Hanson, would you like to unmute? Councillor Hanson, you don't seem to be unmuted. Yeah, I can. Can you come in now, please?
Okay. I'm somewhat confused by the comments from Councillor Suarez. If you look at the Historic England report, in the last sentence it says we also advise that the identified harm should be weighed against the stated public benefits of the developer set out in paragraph F. And clearly, we're looking at a derelict site that's been derelict for a number of years, creates all sorts of issues and problems within the area. It's an environmental blot, and we've got what can only be seen or deemed as a fairly good scheme moving forward, particularly in terms of how the developer is going to improve the environment around it. So I really struggle with those comments when even Historic England are using the usual term to absolve themselves of any responsibility. So I just want to make those comments, Chair.
Thank you for making that point, Councillor Hanson. Can I invite Councillor Cummings to speak now, please? Dave, can you unmute?
Thank you,
Yeah, I can hear you now, Dave.
I was down first with my hand up. However, once
I
again,
didn't have any hands showing on my screen, Councillor Cummings, so I couldn't make a decision on order.
Yeah. However, Councillor Hanson has stolen my thunder once again of the issues I wanted to raise. So of course I fully support what he's mentioned. I just want to ask a question to Virgil because I don't have the notes in front of me. Am I right in thinking that plot of land has been empty for 20 years?
Virgil, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, Dave, Councillor Cummings, I'm not too sure it's 20 years. Norton's for scrap occupied the site. I can't remember when they vacated the site. I'd say it's less than 20 years ago. may have been used in the meantime as a surface level car park, but any use since they vacated is a kind of temporary use that wouldn't be appropriate on a long-term basis. So I think there is a recognition that this site has to be redeveloped.
Right, thanks for that, Fergal.
Absolutely. I think, was it Councillor Thompson? Again, I haven't got any hands up. Was it you, Helen, who wanted to also have a question?
Yes, it was. Thank you.
Go ahead.
It's just with regard to the waiver of Section 106 payments. Clearly, a lot of what the developers are planning to do is outside the perimeter, the strict perimeter of the buildings, but there's also a couple of sections through between the buildings. And I just wanted to ask, how public, they're calling it public realm, how public is that public realm? One of them looks to be completely glassed in to me, and I just wondered, they look like they're extensions of New Bird Street, and is it Greenland Street? How public is that? And how public do we know it will be in the future?
Okay, Councillor Thompson, yeah, two very valid points, and maybe I didn't explain it in relation to the wind mitigation. So all the trees, all the planting you see off-site, and I think it's, we're just going back, yeah, if you hold up that image for the moment, all that planting you see off-site, that is not within, that hasn't been discounted. The applicants will have to pay for all that planting out of their own dime. That's not offset, that's not part of the enhanced open space public realm provision. That's to mitigate against wind levels from the River Mersey to protect the most vulnerable people. What you've seen is, you've seen the fact that currently the site is landlocked. There's no access through it. If you want to kind of cross at this major junction, you're forced kind of one either left and to kind of go in through a number of side streets, or to kind of go up Parliament Street, which is a car dominated road, to kind of travel maybe up towards the Anglican Cathedral. There are openings. This development is linking Chaloner Street and Parliament Street to Jordan Street and Greenland Street to the north. It is open. There's no gates on it whatsoever. You're entirely free to walk through the site. You don't have to reside there. You don't have to use any of the commercial facilities. So we are satisfied that the ground level, what is being proposed, can genuinely operate as open space.
Thank you.
There don't seem to be any other questions, but I do need to flag up that the yellow virtual hands don't seem to be working on my screen. So you'd have to wave anybody who did still want to come in or just speak. But I can't see any indications.
Chair, no further expressions of interest.
Right. Well, I'd like to move that the recommendation be approved. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Usual voting procedures apply. Firstly, do any members wish to move an amendment? In which case, please unmute your microphone and state clearly what your amendment is. Any amendments? No. In which case, Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Juarez?
Against?
Thank you. Would you like a dissent recorded by name also?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And lastly, Councillor Dunne.
Agreed.
Would you like your dissent recording as well, Councillor Dunne?
No, I agree.
Oh, sorry, it just wasn't unclear.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Dunne. Just to confirm the outcome of the vote there, for that is 8 members in favour, 1 member voting against, which is Councillor Juarez, no abstentions. The application is approved on that basis, and we move to our next item of business, number 5 on today's agenda, related to the Cooper's buildings on the 6th floor of 12 Church Street, Liverpool 1 in Central Ward. Chair, if you'd like to invite colleagues in.
Well, I have down here that we have an Andy McMullen. Now, originally I had it down that he was going to be here for questions, but I do wonder, Andy, would you like to speak?
It was just to answer any questions that arise.
Okay, Andy, that's fine. That's what I had down.
Okay.
So I'm going to move on to asking our case officer to comment now, please.
Chair, thank you very much. Welcome back again. You'll see on the image in front of you that the application site relates to the upper floors of 10 to 16 Church Street. It relates to level 3 to 6 of the building. The ground floor and the first floor is occupied by River Island, a clothing retailer, which is to remain in situ. The proposal is to convert the upper floors, which have remained vacant since 2014, into 77 serviced apartments, which would comprise of 41 one-bed apartments and 36 studio apartments. There's been no objection from residents or ward councillors. The application is supported by officers in conservation or inclusive design. There is a lift throughout the building, and 4 accessible apartments and 4 ambulant apartments are to be provided. Highways and environmental health have no objections to this application. The proposal is just in front because there is a requirement to provide street trees at a total of £21,000. The recommendation is subject to Section 106 agreement, but the principle of development is entirely appropriate in this location. The ground floor retail units aren't impacted on. As I said, there'd be no objections to the application. So this scheme is supported by your officer, subject to the stated conditions and the need for Section 106 agreement.
Do we have any questions?
No indications, Chair.
All right. So I'm going to move directly on then and say I move that this recommendation as amended be agreed. Is that agreed?
Chair, in the intervening period of you moving your resolution, Councillor McLinden, I believe, has raised his hand to indicate.
Oh, I see. Oh, yes, we will have any questions from members. Councillor McLinden, please go ahead.
Apologies, Chair, I couldn't get to my hand quick enough.
No, it sometimes happens, doesn't it, Richard?
Yeah, it was only about because it's 3 stories and it's the first story is going to be basically the 3rd floor. Is the lift a firefighter's lift? That's the only question I have, because otherwise you've got access issues then, haven't you?
Can we have an answer on that, possibly from Andy McMullen?
Yeah. So, Chair, the lifts that are in there at the moment have been condemned. So they're putting 2 new lifts in, one of which will be a firefighting lift.
That's fantastic, Andy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that sounds very satisfactory. So I can't see any other questions. Michael, are there any other questions coming up?
No further indications, Chair.
So I return to my motion. Can I move that the recommendation as amended be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. There don't appear to be any indications of amendments from members, therefore we move immediately to the vote. Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion. Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson. Thank you. Councillor McLinden. Thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Juarez.
He left the meeting, Michael.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
She did say she'd leave at 11, didn't she?
Councillor Dunne.
Agreed.
Thank you. Therefore, the voting is 8 in favour, none against and no abstentions, and the recommendation is agreed on that basis. We will therefore move on to our next item of business, number 6 on today's agenda, related to number 16 Queen Avenue, Liverpool 2, which is in Central Ward. Chair.
So I have here that we have Richard Byrne present to answer questions. So correct me, Richard, if I'm wrong on that. So I'm going to hand over to our case officer now to present this item.
Sorry, Chair, I am available to present. I have produced
All
a
right,
5-minute
Richard, would you like to
presentation.
go ahead with the presentation then?
Sure. Thank you. Hello, I'm Richard Byrne and I'm the planning agent who has acted on behalf of the applicant throughout the planning process. I'll be giving you a presentation today that introduces the proposal for development, presents the policy support for the proposal and seeks to address concerns raised by local residents and the local ward councillor so as to reassure members that the change of use from residential within C3 to residential within C1 for service departments is a proposal that should gain planning approval from the committee. We believe the change of use has overwhelming policy support and is fully in line with the vision for Liverpool as set out by the Liverpool UDP and emerging local plan for Liverpool to be the central hub that drives regional growth and establishes Liverpool as a destination of choice for travel. Next slide, please. The proposed site is located on Queen Avenue. Queen Avenue is a narrow pedestrian arcade connecting Dale Street to Castle Street. It is sustainably located within the core of the city centre and benefits from a wide range of public transport links, shops, cafes, restaurants and financial and professional services. I think it's really important to take into consideration that 16 Queen Avenue, 16 to 18 Queen Avenue is a grade 2 star listed building, while numbers 2 to 14 and 13 to 15 are grade 2 listed buildings as well in their own right. Their location within the Castle Street conservation area and World Heritage Site only goes to further demonstrate the value that the proposal offers to would-be visitors of the city. Reflecting upon those characteristics, it would be fair to say that the heritage value of the buildings and their location is therefore exceptional and unique to the application site. And it is within this scope that the applicant seeks to broaden the special offering for residential accommodation in the city by sharing this opportunity with a wider audience and bringing inward investment to the city by enhancing its reputation as an international destination for travel, business and leisure. The applicant intends to do this by sharing the unique opportunity to stay at 16 Queen Avenue in the hope that visitors do become return visitors to the city. I think it should be noted also that the vision of the applicant is for 16 Queen Avenue to offer an upmarket residential offering for longer term lets of commercial clients, and this does form a central objective to their business plan. Next slide, please. The proposal itself seeks only to change use of the building, which already benefits from residential planning permission and thereby establishes the principle of residential use in this location. As you can see from this slide, the proposed development will take place to the upper floors of those buildings mentioned previous. There will be a total of 14 two-bedroom units and 1 three-bedroom unit. Next slide, please. As previously highlighted, there would be no physical changes proposed to implement the change of use. However, there has been acoustic glazing and obscure privacy windows that are located to the Sweeting Street frontage as per condition of the original residential conversion. In this sense, the applicant has sought to ensure that the use can be implemented in complement to the existing locality. Nonetheless, the applicant is motivated to achieve a scheme that is viewed as an asset, not only to the city, but also to that locality, and as such has brought in a third-party management company to manage the daily operation of the development. Final slide, please. The management of the property has been outsourced to an established and leading property management company who do manage over 100 properties throughout the city already and employ a core team of 4 management staff, each of which have their own responsibilities for guest relations, maintenance, facilities and housekeeping, and they do also employ a wider team of housekeepers, maintenance personnel, casual staff, marketing and concierge. Should members grant approval today, then an operational management plan will be produced and agreed with the council that will further provide an additional level of control for the council to enforce matters of concern should they arise in a future operation. In conclusion, while it is important to take into consideration the formalisation of the operational management plan, in agreement with the council and the applicants and the management company. It is our view that the proposal to change use from C3 residential units to C1 service departments is a proposal that is justified and does have overwhelming policy support. I think we're really keen to stress that the development is an asset to the city. It enhances its reputation as a destination of choice for travel, for business travel and leisure. So thank you for your time and consideration today, and now I welcome questions members may have so that we can hopefully form an agreed consensus for approval today. Thank you.
Michael, do we have any questions? I can't see any on my screen.
No indications as yet, Chair. No.
Okay. So thank you for that, Richard. I now have Councillor Nick Small, who wants to address the committee in objection, and that will be followed by resident Shelley Gorsland. Councillor Small.
Thank you. Can people hear me okay? I'm just, yeah.
Yeah. And I'll have to restrict you to 3 minutes, Councillor Small.
Okay, I can easily do that. I'm here supporting residents who live on Sweeting Street. There's around 3 residential blocks on Sweeting Street. There's around 18 apartments there, so there's probably getting on for 40 people living on Sweeting Street at the moment. Why we're here today is because there's been complaints about antisocial behaviour, and we had enforcement teams in over the summer, and what we found is that this the 16 Queen Avenue was being and has been used for some time as a serviced accommodation, as an Airbnb, without having the appropriate consent to do that. So this is about regularising what's actually been happening. And I'd also note to the committee that this property is still being advertised, despite the enforcement action, despite not currently having planning permission. It's still being advertised on booking.com and other websites as an Airbnb style accommodation. My objection is on the grounds of the impact that this is having on the residential amenity for those residents living on Sweeting Street. What they've been experiencing is significant antisocial behaviour, significant noise, significant disturbance because of the location and the operation of this property as an Airbnb style accommodation. I note that there's conditions, and it's welcome that there's conditions being recommended. Those conditions don't go far enough. I would suggest that there needs to be no access at all onto Sweeting Street. It's only being proposed that access is restricted between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. I'm not sure how this is actually going to be enforced because there is a button that people can press to get onto Sweeting Street at the moment. On the operational plan, it's good that there's an operational plan. I've spoken privately to the management company being proposed and want to engage with them, but I'd like a commitment from Richard today that councillors and residents will be involved in drawing up that operational plan, because residents need to be listened to and how this affects them needs to be taken on board. On the point on the condition on the obscured glass, all that's being proposed is that the windows that are currently obscured remain obscured. What I think we need to do is make sure that all windows facing onto Sweeting Street are obscured, because there are privacy concerns that residents living on Sweeting Street have on this. It's welcome to hear from Richard that the business plan being proposed is focused around commercial tenants and not around stag hen do's, football visitors. That seems to be the case at the moment. If it is commercial tenants, that will...
You have had your 3 minutes, Councillor.
Okay, if I can just finish off on this point. If it is commercial tenants, that will restrict and will reduce some of those potential problems. But what I'd like to see is a condition written in to say that, that these won't be rented out for one night, that it's only going to be for 2 nights or more. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. I will ask our case officer to comment on that later, but I'd like to invite now our resident to speak. Shelley Gorsland, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have checked the list of attendees, and unfortunately the local resident does not appear to have been able to join us.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask our case officer now to come in on this and to comment on some of the points raised by Councillor Small, because of course in our notes we do have that this has been rented out, but on a commercial basis to companies who are needing to put people in Liverpool as a result of the pandemic. So I don't know if our case officer will be able to address these issues. I'd also like to know if we've had registered complaints with environmental health on this.
Chair, thank you very much. You may remember that last year planning permission was granted to refurbish and convert this former office buildings to C3 commercial use, which is kind of private residential use. So there was a substantial investment at the time. Originally, residents of Sweeting Street raised concerns in respect overlooking issues of noise in relation to the residential use of the building. And at the time, I think the developers turned up and told committee that it would be used as C3 apartments, which is kind of primary source of residential use, as opposed to C1, which is the kind of short stay, the kind of weekend visitors to the city centre. So I think at the time, well, definitely officers and probably committee were satisfied as well. If those units were occupied by permanent residents, they could kind of coexist quite a lot more easily with Sweeting Street residents. So a lot of work went in already in terms of obscure glazing in all the windows which face onto Sweeting Street, secondary glazing for acoustic insulation and mechanical ventilation. If the secondary glazing and acoustic insulation hasn't gone in already, there's a condition attached to the recommendation that means that those works have to be done before the property can be formally occupied. The building is within the main offices area, and as said, a conversion to Class C3 use has already been approved. The principle of use for service apartments, it is in accordance with the unitary development plan and the local plan moving forward, which supports the use of redundant upper floors of buildings and proposals which support the visitor economy. Said attached to the recommendation, there's restrictions on no access via Sweeting Street from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. and equally so the applicants have suggested an operational management plan to ensure that the property is managed properly. I share Councillor Small's frustrations to a certain extent. There has been ongoing issues in terms of complaints from residents all through the pandemic in respect of construction work being carried outside the permitted operating hours. So I think what members have got to be aware of, in front of you today, there's an application to use the property as service apartments. The applicants have suggested that this would be for people who would reside in Liverpool during the week. They'd be there effectively Monday to Friday. Councillor Small has suggested that the property is already advertised on kind of Booking.com and other platforms for kind of short stay weekend accommodation. So members, if you're minded that a C1 use would be appropriate in this location, it is nigh and impossible to restrict the number of days that any resident can stay there. It'd be very hard to enforce. We've tried to take action. We've looked at Booking.com. We've seen kind of reviews that have been already posted online, and it's very difficult to ascertain how long the people have been there, what sort of residential use were they there, as said, for kind of working in the city and choose to live there during the week, or was it more the visitor economy? If the premises is to go to a C1 use, we are satisfied, subject to, as said, issues relating to obscure glazing, secondary glazing and acoustic insulation. restriction on access by Sweeting Street outside 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. and a bona fide operational management plan. We're satisfied that the two uses can coexist, but it has got to be managed properly. Councillor Small suggested condition restricting a minimum of 2 nights stay in the premises opposed to 1. We can attach those conditions, but it's, as I said, it's going to be very hard to enforce without having proof. I don't know if environmental health are...
Yes, they are going to come in,
Okay,
Fergal.
so in relation to any ongoing noise complaints in respect of the operation of 16 to 18 Queen Avenue, so far maybe perhaps they can address it, but to make members aware of a C1 use, which is kind of short stay visitors apartments, is an appropriate use in this location, but I think it has got to be managed properly, which is obviously it's a lot more difficult to enforce. But perhaps if we listen to what environmental health have to say, and then I can answer any other comments.
I'm going to invite environmental health in now, Fergal. So Dr.
Hello.
Ian Rushforth, would you like to come in?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can, Ian.
Yeah, just checked our complaints record, and we have only received, as far as I can see, 1 complaint about this property, and it was in relation to construction noise from obviously the construction phase, rather than wasn't an operational complaint in terms of guests misbehaving or being noisy.
That is simply not true. There's been loads of complaints. There's been...
Excuse me, Councillor Small. I did not invite you to come in at this stage. I'm asking environmental health, and they've got 1 registered complaint at the moment, which is what I wanted to find out about. We also...
In terms of what we can see from the database.
Councillor Small, can we take this in the correct order, please? Now, Dr. Rushforth hasn't finished speaking. Can I invite you back, Ian, please?
So I can only go on what I can see from the database. So I don't know whether the complaints have gone through to the councils, some other routes. But in terms of what I can see on the database, I can only see that complaint about the construction noise.
We actually had that mentioned by a case officer. So the planning department are also aware of that particular complaint.
Yeah, they're working out of hours. Yes.
We've always made it clear at planning that, you know, in order to take these things on board, we do need to have registered complaints with the police or environmental health about nuisance. So, Councillor Small, it does seem that although the residents are not happy, that they haven't probably registered their complaints with the correct people, I would venture to suggest.
That simply isn't the case. They've put numerous complaints in to environmental health, to planning. The fact that this planning application is here today is because planning enforcement took enforcement action because of the noise and because of the breach of the planning application, and they brought this planning application in, and that needs to be noted by this committee. I accept it mightn't be, some of this might be registered on the database, but I can assure committee members that I have personally seen scores of complaints that have gone to officers over the summer and before about this.
Chair, can I just interject there?
Yes, and then I'm going to invite Richard in as well, Fergal. So you're coming first.
I think Councillor Small is correct. Numerous complaints were received. It was largely in relation to construction work and parking. So a lot of the complaints, maybe perhaps only 1, went to environmental health. Planning looked into it. They were in breach of the stated operating hours as part of their construction management plan. Obviously, there was issues in relation to COVID, and we were told they could only carry out work at certain times. Complaints were also passed on to parking enforcement because I think there was skips and vehicles parked along Sweeting Street, which is very narrow for long, lengthy periods of time. So I think Councillor Small is correct in relation to what the activities, the unauthorised activities that did happen over the summer months.
I'd like to invite now Richard Byrne to come in.
Yeah, if I could just, yeah, thank you for that, Chair. If I could just respond to a few of the concerns specifically by Councillor Nick Small as well. I think what I really want to stress is that, you know, the applicant does really value this property. They view it as an asset, and they want the locality to view it as an asset as well. And I think one thing that I really want to push forward is that the operational management plan, which will have to be agreed with the council in cooperation with the applicants and the management company as well as ourselves, will provide a mechanism for the council to then, you know, sort of tie enforcement to it to the management plan in the future should any issues arise moving forward. So in that sense, I think it's really, really important that we do get that management plan together. And also, just to pick up on one question that you did have, was that the management company absolutely can make a point of contact available, you know, 24/7 to any residents who want to be registered to that, so that they can, you know, contact the management company out of office hours, where maybe that they can't get hold of somebody from the council. I just wanted to make that point really, and just reiterate that the applicant is really committed to the development, and they really value the property and what they're trying to do, and they want that to be a complementary use to the area, to the residents as well as the businesses and the local neighbourhood that's made up of restaurants and shops and cafes. And that's just the point I wanted to make.
Thank you for that, Richard. That's fairly clear. That was something that was requested by the local councillor, and I'm glad that that can be accommodated. We have a question now from Cllr Joe Dunne.
Hello. Yeah, it's just for the planning officer, really. I actually share the frustrations of Councillor Small, and I appreciate on the enforcement side that if there is enforcement, it will be quite difficult to actually uphold. But I'm just wondering what type of enforcement you actually have in mind for this scheme if it was to go ahead.
So who's this question for? Is it for Fergal?
Yes, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Fergal, if you could come in, please.
Yeah, Councillor John, what's been spoken about is the ongoing issue of enforcement during the construction of the building. Now, all the building works are more or less complete, so that shouldn't be an issue moving forward. The recommendation is subject to conditional an operational management plan being submitted, which adheres to a set of rules effectively to govern the operation of the premises, to ensure that residents in Sweeting Street and the surrounding area aren't impacted upon. That information hasn't yet been provided. Normally what that, as Mr. Byrne has surmised, is residents are given details of like a member of management company. So if there are complaints received, they can get in touch with that management company directly at the time, not waiting for a couple of days later. There's got to be, if offences have been carried out, there's potentially got to be the potential to remove those people who are causing concern from the premises. But as of yet, that management plan hasn't been submitted. It's conditional on this recommendation. What I was trying to say is it's quite often difficult to enforce because we're getting the information secondhand. We're getting either information from booking.com or it's quite subjective. We don't know if the person has been there 1 day, 2 days, 2 weeks or whatever equally. So we don't, just say if there's noise along Castle Street or Sweeting Street, we don't know if the cause of the antisocial behaviour has come from residents of that specific property or who reside or who are visiting the area. So it is difficult to enforce. Effectively, a lot of it is based on trust. You're trusting that the applicant would carry out the business in an appropriate manner and would have due regard to the surrounding residents.
Councillor,
there's not much more I can add, I'm afraid.
yeah, Councillor Hanson has a question. Joe, I think you need to unmute. I can see your lips moving, but I can't hear you. Still can't hear you, Joe. Carry on, Joe.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Right, okay. In terms of the C1 use and the request from Councillor Small in relation to ensuring that the accommodation can be let out for one night only. I mean, it's not just the city centre that's being impacted by whether it be a stag do or a football do or whatever. It's a growing problem right across the city. And I understand and recognise that Fergal says it's difficult to enforce. But actually, if the residents living in that area used the loaf, it'd be fairly easy to identify the one nights only. Just booked themselves in for a couple of one nights, and then they got the evidence to prove that. I think Fergal's right in terms of it is difficult, but it's not impossible. Yeah, and I think that we should be applying that restriction or that point in the planning approval. And secondly, Councillor Small has asked for input into the business plan or the organisational plan. So my question is in terms of, from a planning committee perspective, if we were to agree and put that request in on Councillor Small's behalf and the residents' behalf, what happens if they can't reach an agreement? In terms of the request made by Councillor Small, but the residents and the planning, the developers cannot reach agreement. Where does that leave the planning application? So, I mean, I'd ask Fergal for some guidance and advice on both those issues, but I'm minded to move certainly on C1 that the development cannot let property out for one night only, and I will pick that up at later on the meeting, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Yeah, in terms of residents and potentially ward councillors' input to the management plan, that in normal circumstances, we receive a management plan, we'll consult environmental health, we're experienced in these, we will look at them to see if they're legitimate, if there's a set of procedures to deal with kind of issues that arise. I think if you were genuinely to involve because quite clearly the residents are concerned with the use of the property as a C1 use. So I think you could invite their comments, but I think eventually you would have to secure kind of agreement on the management plan, even if the residents still had overall concerns, because I don't think you could use the submission of a management plan and effectively the use not commencing until that management was signed off as a kind of a backdoor to kind of scupper development. So I think, yes, seek comments from residents of Sweeting Street, but they haven't got a kind of overall, they can't decide whether the management plan is signed off or not, but okay.
Yeah, that's all.
I'm
happy with that.
Okay, Councillor Hanson, I don't know if there's a second part of the question that I've missed.
I didn't invite Councillor Small to speak. We have a question from a planning committee member. They are the people who are entitled to comment, and that is Councillor Concepcion.
Thanks, Chair. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Tony. Carry on.
Right, yeah. Really, it's in relation to the what's before us is an application for C1 use, which is short stay, and I just don't think it's realistic to put a condition, you know, to say that you've got to stay more than one day. And I think that applies across the city. We're saying that anybody wants to come to visit the city has got to stay more than one day. I just don't think it's realistic. I think the whole crux of this matter is the management strategy. And that should be robust. And local councillors and the city council through our different departments can tackle any issues, I think, in relation to any proposed or perceived antisocial behaviour. So therefore, my comment is really that it's about whether we agree with the C1 use. If we agree with it, I don't think that you can apply any condition limiting the amount of days. Thank you.
Berger, would you like to come in on that, please? And then I'll invite Councillor Hanson to speak.
Yeah, I think Councillor Concepcion is correct. It potentially sets a precedent for elsewhere. Do we invite third parties to comment on all management plans we receive? I think the previous application of River Island is slightly different. There is a kind of unique relationship between Queen Avenue and those residents in Sweeting Street. They do live cheek by jowl, so if there's antisocial behaviour, they perhaps could be impacted more than other residents in the city centre. I think what we've got to make clear is, though, even if we share the management plan with them and invite their comments, regardless of whether they sign up to that management plan or they agree with the contents of it, if the local planning authority, after we consult environmental health, are satisfied with the overall contents, we have the ability to discharge that condition, bearing in mind that the management plan will be required to be submitted and signed off before this use becomes operational.
I'd like to Councillor Hanson to come in now, please.
Thank you. In response to Councillor Concepcion's comments, in terms of there's some merits in that, but obviously those comments are coming from a councillor who represents the leafy suburbs out in Nottingham, not experiencing the difficulties that the inner city wards suffer with this kind of disturbance, antisocial behaviour, which is on a regular basis. I think Fergal's absolutely spot on when he mentions Castle Street and Sweeting Street. That is probably a quite unique part of the city in terms of the way that it's a very, very narrow street. Both of them are. Yeah, the buildings are very, very close together. And I think the comment by Fergal's and cheek by jowl, that's what it is in that particular area. It is a unique part of the city. So I think in terms of trying to help the residents and demonstrating to the residents that we as councillors are listening to their concerns. Again, it's just as importantly, yeah, Fergal is saying it's now difficult, it's now impossible to enforce what I've suggested, but at least it's there for the residents to be able to use. And more importantly, I guess, is that the comments coming from the residents are being seen to be listened to. I think that is equally important because my ward's Kirkdale. I have increasing problems with this kind of issue, yeah, and I'm outside the city centre. So as it spreads out, I just ask the councillors who are not being disrespectful either, who don't have any experiences in their wards, to take cognizance of the issues that the wards that surround the city do have these problems, and these problems are growing and increasing. Could we put something like a C1 into Kirkdale one night only? No, we couldn't. We just couldn't. But you possibly can within Sweeting Street, given the nature of that district and the nature of the way people live there and whatever. You break a bottle in that street, they'll all hear it all around there because it just echoes and reverberates all over the place. So I'll finish on that, Chair. But I will be coming back with a motion to an amendment to your motion, Chair.
However, I would like to say that, of course, when we first approved this application, which was not for service departments, we did insist on quite a lot of conditions that I believe now have been taken into account, and they include noise insulation. So I don't seem to have any other questions coming forward.
Chair, Chair, the applicant has raised their hand and may be able to comment further and respond to the points raised by members, if you're agreeable.
Yes, I'm agreeable for Richard to come in. Would you like to come in, Richard Byrne?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just really want to make sure that when we're discussing this, we also take into consideration that you know, the applicant does want to implement this use in complement to the locality, and part of that will be the operational management plan. And I mean, I think we should really just remember that we need to take into consideration that we're considering a planning application, and while the impact of residential amenity does need to be taken into account, we can, you know, put stuff within that operational management plan, which is a condition of the permission, to make sure that it is managed appropriately, and you know, we can do that. And like I said, the applicant is absolutely, you know, motivated to do that. And I think just one final point I'd like to make is that part of the reason why, you know, the applicant wants to share this development with a wider audience is because of its listed building status, and it is such a unique and stunning building. It should be shared with, you know, as many people as possible and be viewed as an asset for the city, where people can come and visit the city and enjoy it and return again to somewhere where, you know, it is such a special place on Queen Avenue and that area. And just take that into consideration when you understand the motivation of the applicant and how they want to protect that heritage asset as well. And, you know, that will involve robust management where, you know, there will be, you know, there will be vetting to see why they're here or how many people are actually.
Richard. Thank you. We did get the point. Thank you. So I don't seem to have any other questions unless you're going to advise me there's something not coming up on my screen, Michael.
No further indications, Chair.
Recommendation be approved. Is that agreed?
Can I move an amendment, Chair?
Yes.
Chair, can I move that the premises not be allowed to have lettings of less than one night? Have I got that right? Or one night only? Yeah. Where's that effect? Sorry. And also, can I also write into the motion that the developers and the residents actively engage in the proposed management plan, recognising and understanding that residents haven't got a veto, but I think it's important that the residents are fully engaged in whatever's going on as they move forward, so the residents feel empowered in some way, shape or form. Michael, I'd appreciate if you could put that into English for me.
Thank you,
Yes,
Councillor
we have a
Hanson.
seconder.
Just before we seek a seconder to that motion, first of all, in relation to not permitting stays of less than 2 nights duration.
One night.
Effectively, if it's less than 1 night, that's effectively less than a day. So
okay.
It has to be less than 2 nights. Unfortunately, Councillor Hanson, I'm going to have to rule that particular change out of order simply because it's incapable of practical enforcement in terms of the planning process. Whilst I accept the sentiments raised,
Michael, the planning officer didn't say it's impossible. He said it was extremely difficult.
Unfortunately, I make an assessment as solicitor of the committee, Councillor Hanson, and having reviewed the actual rules in terms of enforcement of conditions, I don't consider it reasonable or capable of enforcement. It's not just a question of impracticality. So the point is valid, but not capable of enforcement through the planning process. In relation to the second part of your motion, however, if I may suggest a suitable form of words, if it's of assistance, I would suggest that as a part of the narrative to any resolution, if one is approved, that we add that the developer be encouraged to continue to engage and liaise with local residents and any representatives thereof, including local ward councillors, in order to address any issues associated with the operation of the premises for the proposed purposes. Noting that operation management plan will be submitted to and subject to approval by the local planning authority. Noting your concerns,
I would support that amendment, Michael. I would accept that could be incorporated into my motion.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien. Councillor Hanson, are you satisfied with the wording I have suggested?
I'm satisfied, Michael, but can I have the at some point in the very near future the wording that allowed you to arrive at that legal decision? Because I am confused that whilst the planning officer said it's difficult, it is not impossible. I can demonstrate very, very quickly how I can make that possible. Dead easy for me. Yeah, and if it's dead easy for me, it's dead easy for anybody living in that area as well. So I'd like to see the legal definition of what you're speaking on.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. I will invite the case officer to comment further, but the test associated with the imposition and essentially monitoring of planning conditions is associated with one of reasonableness.
Yeah.
In this instance, in terms of the reasonable practical monitoring and assessment of this condition, it's beyond what would be considered ordinary reasonableness. And if I comment further,
it'd be reasonable for me to go and book that place for one night, and a couple of my friends to book it equally for different nights, and gather that evidence, bring that evidence back to the planning authority and say, I've got clear evidence here that has been breached. That's how simple it would be to demonstrate that they're breaching the planning conditions. It is not difficult. If residents feel that they're being treated not the way they've been told they're being treated, that is dead easy to do. Simple. Janet and John stuff, Michael, with the greatest respect.
Noting your comments, Councillor Hanson, obviously I've given my assessments, and indeed at this juncture, you'll note as committee that on a number of occasions in recent months and years, we have had issues over the reasonableness and indeed enforcement capability of potential conditions as raised. I would invite the case officer, Fergal McAvoy, to comment further. Also, would ask colleague Mr. Hayes to comment further, given he has also had similar experience with conditions of this nature. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much. When I said it would be difficult to enforce, Councillor Hanson said quite rightly, but it wouldn't be unenforceable. I take that comment on board. What Mike has then said is one of the tests in attaching a condition is that condition has got to be reasonable and necessary. Now, why would you attach a condition that restricts people from staying in their premises for a minimum of 2 nights? And I don't think you quite legitimately can say a person who stays there only 1 night is going to be more antisocial behaviour, is going to cause more problems than someone that stays 2 nights or more. I think the purpose of the management plan is to deal with issues of antisocial behaviour when the people stay 1 night, 2 nights, 1 week, what the mechanism is in place for the management company to deal with those issues of antisocial behaviour. What is in front of you today is not to use a short stay apartment, so I think it would be unreasonable attaching a condition that prevents people who might just want to stay there 1 night.
Thank you, Chair. If it helps, I'll give my advice as well, but I think it's been fairly well covered there by...
I'll ask you to come in, John. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think it's been fairly well covered there by Mr. McAvoy. But just to clarify, that there are 6 tests that are legal tests now that are required to be considered when planning committees or officers are looking to attach conditions. Those are that they are necessary, that they're relevant to planning, relevant to the development to be permitted, enforceable, precise and reasonable in all other respects. I think clearly the condition is relevant to the development, is relevant to planning. As Mr. McAvoy has already pointed out, there are 2 elements where it might be questionable, and those are particularly in relation to enforceability. And I understand the point that Councillor Hanson makes, but I think on a practical level, it will be extremely difficult to enforce that. And again, as Mr. McAvoy's pointed out, is whether or not this is actually necessary. What is the difference between staying one night and staying 2 nights in terms of the practical impact upon residents? So if you were to impose the type of condition that Councillor Hanson is looking for, my view, my professional view, would be that you are attaching a condition that doesn't satisfy the legal tests set out in planning legislation. And I think it's for that reason that Mike Jones had come to the comments that he put forward to Councillor Hanson. But happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Michael, if I could come in now, I have accepted one amendment to my original motion. So if Councillor Hanson still wants to go ahead on the other amendment, we need to move to a vote and see if we've got a seconder for that.
Chair, given the advice by the HMO expert in Liverpool and Mr. McAvoy, who used to be called Fergal but is now a Mr. I'll withdraw the amendments on the 1 2 night stay.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. So, Michael, can I suggest that we move to the vote now, please?
Thank you, Chair. However, we do have an indication from Councillor Cummings, very briefly raised his hand. Not sure whether he wishes to comment on the points raised by Councillor Hanson.
Well, the thing is, it's only appropriate if he wants to comment on the point that I have accepted anyway. So I see that we should move to the vote. That's my opinion.
Not disagreeing, Chair. However, there did appear to be a debate taking place between Councillor Hanson and the officers, so it seemed reasonable to see if Councillor Cummings wished to contribute to that debate. Noting in terms of Councillor Hanson's amendments, in terms of the comments from myself and fellow officers over part 1, the second part has been accepted by Councillor O'Brien. Therefore, we have a substantive amended motion to incorporate the additional wording as per I've reworded on behalf of Councillor Hanson. If you're happy to move to the vote, we shall do so. Thank you.
I am. Councillor Cummings, are you happy that we should move to the vote?
Yeah, all I wanted to say was the issue of the how many nights somebody wants to stay. That really isn't a planning issue. That's a licensing issue. So that argument has been taken away. However, the other issue of scrutiny of local residents and councillors, I would definitely support. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. So we'll move to the vote now, please, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, we are voting on an amended resolution incorporating the second part of comments from Councillor Hanson. Therefore, all those in favour, I'll take in turn. Councillor O'Brien?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion? Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Cummings?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat? Councillor Marrat, are you still with us?
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you. And Councillor Dunne?
Agreed.
Just reiterate that, Councillor Dunne, it's not quite clear.
Agreed.
Thank you. Just to confirm, that is 8 members in favour, none against and no abstentions. Therefore, the recommendation as amended by the additional comments by Councillor Hanson is carried accordingly. And we'll move on to item 7, which relates to land off Evans Road, Speak, Liverpool 24 in Speak, Garston Ward. Chair.
And we have Rebecca Thompson here to answer questions, I've been informed. So I'd like to invite our case officer to present to the committee on this, please.
Thank you, Chair. Stuart Clark, team leader of the South team. This is an application for an industrial unit and warehouse unit, which is located on a site that is within or on the edge of the Venture Point Industrial Estate. It's surrounded completely by industrial areas and therefore is governed by your industrial allocation policies. In that respect, the principle of an employment generating use in this area is completely supported, subject to matters of highways and other relevant policies. The applicant has worked closely with your officers to ensure that we get the unit sited in an appropriate location within the plot so it reflects and respects the character of other units within the wider industrial estate. Also with the design, that's been amended so that the more engaging aspects of it are to the front of the site and not at the rear. So your officers are happy that the scheme before you in terms of layout and scale and massing and design are wholly appropriate for this this industrial estate. The Head of Highways and Transportation has assessed the application, and he's more than happy that there will be no detrimental impact on the wider highway network, and that there are appropriate levels of parking within the site and the ability for vehicles to enter and leave safely. There is going to be a loss of a beech hedge, which is overgrown, which fronts the site, which has been there since the site has been in existence pretty much. And the tree officer offers regret that this will be going. However, your officers consider that when weighing the balance and the economic benefits and the employment generation that this scheme will bring, coupled with the fact that it's in an industrial setting and that the scheme will allow for replacement planting to take place on this front boundary, albeit of a lesser scale, we're satisfied that that outweighs any loss of any harm that may be accrued from the loss of the beech hedge. So in conclusion, Chair, this is a proposal for an employment generating use and is wholly welcomed by your officers. So we're happy to answer any questions, but we recommend it for approval.
Thank you, Stuart. Are there any questions? So this could either be for the case officer or for Rebecca Thompson, who's here on behalf of the developer. Well, Michael, unless my screen's playing me up still, I don't see any questions here.
Chair, I can confirm there's no questions indicated.
Right. Okay, so can we move to the vote? Can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Don't appear to be any indicated amendments, therefore your vote please, Chair.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you, Councillor Cummings. Councillor Cummings, you still with us? In which case we'll move on to Councillor Hanson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Dunne.
Agreed.
Thank you. Therefore, that is 7 members voting in favour, none against, no abstentions, and those able to vote. Therefore, the application is approved on that basis. We now move on to agenda item 8, which relates to number 2A, Wavertree Boulevard South, Liverpool 7 in Picton Wood. Chair.
So again, we have Andrew here, who's present for the developer, but here to answer questions. So I will hand over to our case officer to present on this. John, is it you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Like the previous application, this is a proposal for development within a wholly industrial area. It's within the Wavertree Technology Park, and the proposal is to provide an extension to the existing Baxter Healthcare facility. And you'll see from the report that it was always intended to develop this part of the site as part of a two-staged or two-phased, I should say, development. It's never been implemented, but you'll see again from the history of the report that permission has been granted on previous occasions. Clearly, this is in scale with the existing building. It's in an appropriate location, and there are no substantive planning issues that need specific address in my comments. I would simply point out, Chair, the importance of this development referenced in the initial paragraphs of the report. The extension is there to facilitate the production of a medicine that is associated with the current COVID pandemic. Clearly some importance in getting this through today. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Are there any questions?
None are indicated, Chair.
No. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. We don't appear to have any indications of amendments, therefore we move straight to the vote. Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Dunne.
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the vote. That is 7 in favour, none against, no abstentions. The application is therefore approved on that basis. In terms of our remaining items of business, Chair, with your agreement, we have a number of items which have no speakers, and we also have 3 remaining items for which the speakers, including the local ward councillor. I would suggest we vary the order of business slightly, if members of the committee are agreeable, to take numbers 11, 12 and 13 on today's agenda next in sequence, so that we take the speakers in turn, if that's acceptable. If everyone could nod accordingly. Thank you. In which case we move to item number 11, which relates to number 39 Salisbury Road, Liverpool 15, which is in Picton Ward.
And I think we need to have our case officer to present on this, and then we have Councillor Abdul Qadir to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Do you want me to speak on this first, or do you want to hear Councillor Qadir's?
We could hear from Councillor Qadir first then.
Thank you.
Councillor Qadir.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the committee and to object to these HMOs in our ward. I have been present in the last meetings about HMOs within my ward, which is one of the biggest issues that Picton ward, along with other wards, are facing currently. I believe the officer's report lacks fundamental clarity, which will help the committee come to a reasonable decision, and one of which is the lack of clarity in terms of the numbers of HMOs within that locality. Obviously, why that is important is for the committee members to know exactly the impact of this specific development on the area. That's in relations to the MPPF, which is, we can rely on, and in specifically in the planning policy statement, which is SPP 1 and 3, which encourages a mixed and balanced community. Clearly, if you don't have the information in front of you to demonstrate that that this adds value to the community, then surely there's an issue there that the committee really needs to look into. I also would like to draw the attention of the committee to our emerging local plan, and also the Article 4 directive, which is being introduced in this area. And I would argue that because they are at an advanced stage, the committee is able to give it sufficient weight for a rejection of this application. I would argue against the note made in the officer's report regarding our local plan, as I believe that the notes in relation to the comments made by the planning inspectorate was a long time ago, and the updated feedback from and response from the council to the planning inspectorate has been noted by the planning inspectorate. Furthermore, the planning inspectorate has been sitting in a hearing since the 13th of this month, and will be concluding in a couple of days' time. I think it's the 26th, in which he uses that hearing to listen to and look deeper into issues within the local plan that are not accepted by him, or he wants to get more evidence and listen to objectors for that. In this meetings, none of the issues of HMOs have been discussed or are going to be discussed in the timetable that is present and available for committee to, and the officer can confirm that as well. Now, because there isn't any more comments by the officer, the inspector, I believe it is now at an advanced stage. Otherwise, the officer or the planning inspectorate would have commented and would have wanted to look into it. So, meaning that within our emerging plan, it talks about the 10% rule. It also says the same thing in the Article 4. You're looking at that and taking that as a principle to go with, the area has surpassed that. This is from local knowledge that I have, and also previous in 2008 communication with the council and HMO and licensing. It is in excess of 45% in this area. So it's way, way beyond the 10%. So there is no chance for it to be on the grey area. It's actually in the red. And that is a fundamental issue. I think it's our responsibility as well as a city council to respect the rights of residents, and I would urge the committee to consider the rights under the Equality Act 2010, and including the public sector equality duty as well, in terms of protecting the residents, protecting the areas that they are now these developers are constantly trying to erode and cause issues. I would also like to draw your attention to the report that was conducted by the Ecotech on behalf of the government in 2008, which clearly looked at the impact of HMOs and the character and the immunity of on an impact on local community, and it clearly highlighted the issues of such as the pressure on streets, car park, noise, antisocial behaviour, high turnover, negative or lack of maintenance and of housing stock. So all these issues, there are clear evidence that there is an impact. It is clear evidence through different bodies to give us enough information there to see that there is an impact. 10%, as I said, is the right number. We've a lot of other cities, and I would like you to also look into the not just areas, but for instance, Birmingham City Council have introduced a citywide, and I mean a citywide, not by ward, but a citywide cap on as an Article 4 to withdraw permitted development. So we're not the only ones here that we need to do something. Other cities have noticed it. Other cities have taken note and acted. I think it is right for the City Council, Liverpool City Council, to now act in the best interest of the residents. Now, I believe that justice...
Councillor Kadir, you've had far beyond your 3 minutes. I've allowed you more time because you're down here to speak on 3 items, but I would respectfully ask you to draw your remarks to a conclusion now, please.
I will, Chair. And as I said, to make things easy for you, I will not repeat everything I said in the 3. So what I'll say now is you can copy and paste onto the 3. So that'll give you enough time. So I won't get 3 plus 3 plus 3. So just bear with me and I'll just do the conclusion. Okay. So in terms of, I believe the justice that the community deserves from us. So in a court setting, you need to demonstrate beyond reasonable doubt. I don't believe the report has demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt. And I know we're not in a court setting here, but however, I think in terms of principle, in terms of protection of community, it is right that we look at how the impact of these HMOs are on the communities, and we need to do something about it, and it's in your hands, committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kadir. And so I'll take it that this is on behalf of the 3 items, and you'll have to come in if there's some specific detail you want to bring to my attention when we consider the other 2.
Yeah.
So I'm going to invite questions or comments now from planning committee members.
Chair, there don't appear to be any questions from members of the committee, so your case officer will be appropriate to come to this stage. I will also put images on screen to assist you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Obviously, this is familiar territory for this planning committee. There's many applications presented to this committee in relation to HMOs, and an awful lot of them are unfortunately in and around this particular part of the city. It has become, as Councillor Kadir's acknowledged, an area of significant HMO development. And Councillor Kadir has made some interesting points, and I'll try and address them as best as I can. I think the first one is around the amount of HMOs, and specifically, am I or are officers able to give clarity on the number of HMOs in and around this area? The simple answer is I don't have those figures to hand. Your officers do recognise that there is a significant number of HMOs, and it is almost certainly over the 10% that is specified in the policy that's in the draft local plan, and I'll come on to that in a moment. However, it's difficult to establish a precise number at any one time because often it's a moving feast. Properties change back to residential sometimes. We don't have figures in relation to the number of smaller HMOs, certainly through the planning records. We might be able to get those through licensing records. So it's very, very difficult. But what we do know, and we do acknowledge, is that there are a significant number of HMOs in and around these areas. And that is why, through the draft local plan, we are trying to put in place policies that now restrict those numbers to try and mitigate against that cumulative impact. And that leads on to the second point that Councillor Kadir has raised. So what is the weight to be given to that local plan, that draft local plan? As you see in the report, there is a policy now proposed for this particular area. However, as we say in the report, only limited weight can be given to that at this stage. Now, Councillor Kadir is absolutely right. There is currently a local plan inquiry taking place, which will examine in more detail the issues around HMOs, and specifically whether or not this policy needs to be amended in some way, having regard to the representations that are received in relation to it. However, it's important to understand that the policy can only become effective because of the way that it's written. The policy only is triggered at a point where an Article 4 direction is in place. Now, whilst an Article 4 direction has been put in place in relation to other parts of the city, in particular the Dales, it has not been put into place in relation to this part of the city. And therefore, even if we were to attach more weight to the local plan, as Councillor Kadir is suggesting, the policy still could not be triggered because there is no Article 4 that is needed to bring into effect that particular policy. Members might be aware that there has been recently a report to Cabinet on the whole issue of Article 4 directions, and that is being progressed following the positive resolution by Cabinet to pursue Article 4s across the city. But at this stage, there is no Article 4 direction, unfortunately, in place for this particular part of the city, and therefore whatever weight is ascribed to the policy
it cannot at this stage take effect. And so we are left with applying the policy as best as we can through the draft local plan, but more importantly through the statutory local plan, the UDP, and all of the reasons why we have recommended approval are set out within your agenda papers. I acknowledge the other issues that Councillor Cllr has raised. Other authorities are looking to do this, and we as a city are as well in trying to roll out the Article 4 direction to control the smaller HMOs. Again, I just want to make an observation in relation to this issue around Article 4 directions. All an Article 4 direction does is bring into control those smaller houses of multiple occupancy. So whereas at the moment, planning permission is not required to change a property from a dwelling house to a smaller HMO, and that is 6 people or fewer, what isn't altered is the policy basis then on which decisions are made. So the policy basis is still the same, and it is still that in the UDP. So I just want to make that observation, Chair. The Article 4 is not the policy. The Article 4 is part of an overall approach to trying to provide some additional controls over the growth of HMOs in and around the city. And then lastly, Councillor Cllr has mentioned, you know, the community justice, I think, were his words, and the need to obviously apply very careful scrutiny here. He referred to, you know, beyond reasonable doubt. That, unfortunately, is not the test for you as a planning committee. The question is whether or not the proposal is in accordance with the development plan and any other material considerations. Material considerations do include the NPPF, they do include the draft local plan, and we set out in the report what the weight is to be ascribed to those. And for all of those reasons, Chair, we have come to the conclusion that planning permission should not be withheld in this instance, and therefore recommended approval accordingly. Of course, happy to answer any particular questions members may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
None appear to be indicated, Chair.
Okay, so I'm going to move to the vote then. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Do any members wish to move an amendment? No indications, in which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden.
Agreed, reluctantly.
Thank you. Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Dunne. Yes, Councillor Dunne is no longer on the call. Therefore, the number of voting members is 6, of which 6 are voted in favour, none against, no abstentions, and on that basis the recommendation is carried. Chair, with the agreement we move on to our next item of business, number 12 on the agenda, which relates to a property in the same road, apologies, in number 79 Woodcroft Road, Liverpool 15.
Yes, I'm going to hand over to the case officer on this one.
Again, Chair, very, very similar issues to the previous item. It's in the area where in the draft local plan we are looking to apply a policy that addresses this concern around cumulative impact, but again, for all the reasons that are set out in the report, and as I pointed out in relation to the previous item, the weight to be attached to that and the actual application of that policy are difficult at the moment. The weight, as I say, is in your officer's view limited. Clearly that will increase over time and is likely to increase following the conclusion of the inquiry, and it'll be interesting to see what comments are made during that process. But as of today, I would only argue that limited weight can be applied to that policy, and furthermore there is this issue of the requirement to have the Article 4 in place as well in order to effect the draft policy in any event. So I don't wish to say anything further, Chair, unless members have any specific questions.
I did say I would invite Councillor Kadir in if he indicated. So would you like to come in now, Councillor Kadir?
Again, just to kind of just reinforce that my objection and my colleague's objection, Councillor Nicholas and Calvin's made on again the same area. However, this road seems to have it the worst. You've seen, I think, one of the photos that just flashed in front of you, where you see the conversions of two HMOs right next to each other. So surely the impact will be more severe as a result of having two really close and sandwiching houses in between. I recall that you refused planning on one of the applications that are still pending, I think, decision by the Inspectorate of Appeal, which has the similar case of sandwiching. Now, these are two houses right next to each other, sandwiching others, which if you go to Street View, and this is why I would really recommend the committee to either have a site visit or at least a street map view visit to just look at the impact of these streets. So what I would recommend on this one is to delay, postpone your judgment on this one until you see for yourself the street that this is entailed and the impact of it. Once you see it through either visit or preferably a street view, which will be probably a lot easier, you'll see the actual impact of these HMOs on this particular street. Thank you.
Are there any questions on this one?
No indications of questions, Chair. Thank you.
All right. So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Do members have any amendments or comments to move at all? No? In which case we'll move to the vote on the Chair's resolution. Chair, your vote, please.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion? Councillor Concepcion? Thanks. Councillor Thompson? Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor? That concludes the votes of the 6 voting members, 6 in favour, none against, no abstentions, and that application is approved on that basis. We'll now move on to our next item of business, which is number 13, and which relates to number 30 Alderson Road, Liverpool 15, which is again in Picton Ward. Chair?
And this one is actually for an 8-bedroom HMO. The other 2 were for 7. And we do have present Sam O'Flaherty, who's here to answer any questions on behalf of the developer, should anybody wish. So I'm going to hand over to our case officer.
Again, thank you, Chair. Very, very similar to the previous 2 items. It's in the same broad locality as the previous 2. It's in Picton Ward. It is in an area that is covered by the draft local plan, for which policy H11 will ultimately apply. But again, for all the reasons that have set out in relation to the previous 2 applications and as set out in the report, your officer's view is that there is no reasonable justification to withhold permission here, and have recommended planning permission be granted accordingly. The only difference with this application, Chair, as you've already rightly pointed out, is this is a slightly larger HMO than the previous 2, and the work is comprises a single-storey rear extension and a dormer extension to the rear and some roof lights to the front. So the increase in numbers is facilitated by those physical works. And again, I think you've just had some images on the screen there, which give an indication of some of the similar examples in and around that area. Happy to answer questions, Chair.
Are there any questions or comments?
None appear to be indicated, Chair. Thank you.
So yes, I'm going to have to reluctantly move that the recommendation be approved. Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Any amendments at all from members or comments? No. In which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the vote on this application, and the voting is 6 in favour, none against, no abstentions, and on that basis the application is approved. We will now revert to our remaining items of business, of which we have no remaining speakers. With that in mind, we return to agenda item number 9, and which relates to number 26 Ampthill Road, Liverpool 17, and which is in St Michael's Ward. I will display some images on screen shortly, and I would ask the case officer to intervene and comment to assist at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Again, it's another HIMO, I'm afraid. Members are fully aware of the issues surrounding these properties. This is for a 7-bed HIMO, which has a certificate of lawfulness in place for a 6-bed HIMO. So we're looking at an increase in one person over and above what they can lawfully use the premises as. Spatially, internally, it's fully compliant with your policies, and there's appropriate provision for bin and cycle storage. The head of highways has raised no objections given its proximity to goods services and public transport links. There's not much really more I can add, Chair, to what you've got in your papers before you, and we're happy to recommend approval, but happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
There don't appear to be any, Chair.
No.
Thank you.
So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Any amendments or comments? No. In which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed, Mike.
Thank you. And Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the vote. 6 in favour, none against, no abstentions, and the recommendation is therefore carried on that basis. We move therefore on to number 10, which is next, which is on the same road, and number 14, Ampthill Road this time, in St Michael's Ward. Similar to our last item, I will bring images up on screen shortly and ask the case officer to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yep, this is, again, it's an identical application to the one that you've just considered. It's the same applicant, the same street, same type of property, exactly the same issues apply that we've, in the papers, conclude it's acceptable. Again, not much I can add, Chair, but happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
There don't appear to be any, Chair. Thank you.
So again, can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Any amendments? No, in which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden?
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Marrat?
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the vote. On that basis, the application is approved. We'll move on to our next item of business now, which for clarity is number 15 on today's agenda. This item relates to Thingwall Road, Liverpool 15 in Wavertree Ward. As indicated previously, we have no speakers either for or against the application. Therefore, whilst I bring some images on screen briefly, I will ask the case officer to comment at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mike. Again, an application type that is familiar to this planning committee. So it's an application for telecommunications equipment. It's the prior approval application process. So members are limited to their consideration in terms of siting and design only. You'll see where it is on that site plan. And hopefully in a moment we'll have some images in terms of the height, and it's relationship with other street furniture. I think there might be one more slide. There we go. So you can see it there, Chair. Obviously, it is higher than some of the surrounding street furniture, but in your officer's view, it is an acceptable proposal, would not have a significant adverse impact on amenity, and for those reasons have recommended approval. Happy to answer questions, Chair.
I think Councillor Concepcion's got a question. Have you, Tony?
No, Chair, no.
Oh, I thought you put your hand up. Are there any other questions?
There don't appear to be on this occasion, no, Chair.
So can I move that the recommendation be approved? Is that agreed?
Thank you, Chair. Are there any amendments or comments from members? No. In which case, Chair, your vote.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden.
Agreed.
Thank you. And Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. That concludes the voting on this item. 6 in favour, none against, no abstentions. We'll therefore move on to our final item of business, which is number 16 on the agenda and which relates to Grinfield Street, Liverpool 7 in Picton Ward. Similar to our last item, no speakers either for or against. Therefore, with that in mind, I'll ask the case officer to comment and I will bring up images of the application site shortly. Thank you.
Again, Chair, same issues as previously, prior approval type application. I think this is slightly more balanced than the previous one, where you're on a busy road. This is a larger mast, so this is one of the 20-metre high masts. And as you can see there, it is quite close to residential property. So we've had some discussion on this. We've looked carefully at the proposal. And I think compared to some others, it does require slightly closer attention, given where it's located and the size of it. But your officers have taken the view, based on the information that's been provided, that this is appropriate and have recommended permission accordingly. So those visuals, I think, are helpful to understand the scale and the context there. Happy to answer any questions, Chair.
John, why has it got to be 20 metres high?
It's usually for technical requirements, because of they need a certain vertical separation distance in terms of the wavelength. I'm not a technical expert, Chair, but my understanding is that there are technical reasons why it has to be that height. It operates at a different wavelength to other to the 4G and the 3G, which means that it has to be higher than the existing equipment.
So wouldn't that mean then that if it has to be higher because of the 3G and 4G to go to 5G, wouldn't that follow technically that all the rest of the masts across the city would be 20 metres high?
No, because some of them are still operating at 4G, and that's why a lot of those existing masts aren't removed. So these are specifically for 5G.
I think you've lost me there somewhere.
I think I've lost myself, Councillor Hanson. I think Mr. Clark will speak to me afterwards about this, but he has a slightly better understanding of the technical requirements here, and it might be helpful if he provides some clarification on the technical side of it. I'm just scanning the report while he speaks.
Case officer from the southern area to come in, because I know he's negotiated a few to come down. We generally are 20 metres, aren't they? But sometimes we do manage to get the telecommunications company to bring them down. So Stuart, would you like to come in on this?
Apologies, Chair. The case officer of the South is no longer. By way of commentary in terms of issues John Hayes has raised already, as members will appreciate, when there's been instances of mast sharing using different generations of 3G, 4G and 5G, That's the case where you have the physical separation between the antennae. So you move up the different levels of the antenna, and the higher up you go, that's the later the generation of the actual transmission at that level. For the mast before you, part of the consideration is not just the generation, it's also the topography of the surrounding area to give them a sufficient coverage for the area the mast is meant to serve. So that's why on some occasions they'll be able to reduce it down to 17 metres in height and still cover the area it's intended to cover, whereas on occasions such as this, they'll suggest a 20-metre mast simply because of the area it's intended to cover and the layout of the actual ground beneath in terms of the wave dispersal.
I think you just made that up, Michael, but well done for making it up so well. Given the 20-metre height of it, and given this close proximity to housing, you know, because it's dwarfing the houses, isn't it? Can we, John? I'm asking you because you've always said you were the expert on this kind of stuff, and you've been exposed today. So you know, and given that you're an officer for the north of the city as well, I'm a little bit disappointed. Can we sort of defer this and take it back for further consultation with the telecom people to see if we can get it reduced? Notwithstanding what you're saying, John, I just think it's worthwhile just going back and asking the question: is there some other way that we can get that reduced to, you know, a reasonable height?
We can, in theory, do that. The difficulty I've got, Chair, is that these are prior approval applications, and the legislation allows for a default permission if they are not determined within a 56-day period or some other agreed period. Now, I don't know what the agreed period has been set at, but it is usually 1 or 2 days after the relevant planning committee. So my guess is that the case officer has negotiated a period over and above the specified 56 days to allow it to get to this planning committee, but the period after that will be limited. My guess is that it won't give us the opportunity to take it back. Now, the telecommunications operators are usually fairly willing to work with the local authorities and to try and find negotiated solutions. However, there is a risk, a significant risk, that if you were to defer it today, they could say, well, we're not prepared to allow a further extension of time, and then we would be forced into having to make a decision under delegated authority on the application. I think my own view, Chair, would be that if members have a significant concern about the proposal in front of you, it would be far better to actually make a decision today. And if you were unhappy about the scale and the relationship with residential properties, then it is absolutely right and proper for you to make that judgment, and you can of course refuse it in those circumstances. Mike will probably have to make some comments about the protocol here in terms of reporting back if you were to come to that view, because obviously we normally ask for reports to be referred back. However, again, given the legislative requirements here in making a decision in a certain specified time period, then again we wouldn't be able to do that. But my own view is that you would be better coming to a view on the application as is presented to you. These are matters of judgment. The issues that you're allowed to take into account are in relation to siting and design, and that's why perhaps I am struggling a little bit on the technical side of it, because your officers aren't experts on the technical side of it. What we do, however, is we will always negotiate to try and secure lower mass, particularly in these locations. My guess is that the officer has done that and got to a point where this is required for reasons to ensure the delivery of 5G in this particular area, and they can't find another suitable location, and they can't reduce the overall height of it. But as I say, it is open to you as a committee chair to come to a different view to your officers.
John, can I ask you, Ad, you
Excuse me, Joe. Can I invite Tony in, please?
Well, I was having a conversation with the officer.
For some time. It isn't a conversation, it's a debate.
He was responding to a question I asked.
I've invited Councillor Concepcion, then I'll invite you, Councillor Hanson.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Well, you can come in as soon as I've finished. I just wanted to ask, if we could get the picture back up, you know where it's sited. It does seem to be in the middle of the pavement, and I was just wondering why. Is it there? Why can't it be set further back? You see there, why can't it be set further back? Why is it in the middle of the, well, in the pavement? Yeah.
Again, Chair, it's usually for technical reasons. It's possible, but again, we share these with highway colleagues, and they will obviously advise us if they are concerned about accessibility, about ensuring an adequate passageway. So sometimes it's better to have them on that side. Sometimes it's better to have them set away. And I think we've just taken a view here that it's appropriate in that location. It still affords pedestrian access and other users.
Okay, can I have Councillor Hanson's comment now, please, or question?
Thank you. We'll continue with our conversation, John. That was interrupted before. In saying, what you're basically saying is you're damned if you, damned if you don't. If we refuse it today, it will go through on whatever. Is it possible then for us today to make a decision to refuse but pass the delegation responsibility onto yourselves, then to allow you to go off and have a discussion with the providers, and you've got the delegated authority to make a decision one way or the other? Would that be possible, Michael?
I think that's possible. It's a question for Mike. Yeah.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Joe, for your comments raised on this application. Both the points raised are entirely valid in terms of what your options are. As John alluded to, the typical process for when you refuse an application is obviously the committee resolves, for example, this committee, to refuse the application for reasons stated, and that then entails the production of a further report to the next available committee, assessing those reasons for refusal, and if necessary, providing additional formal planning reasons to reinforce the refusal if members are so minded to ratify that situation. I believe what you're asking for in this instance is to resolve to refuse the permission on the basis of its proximity to residential properties and its scale and height and therefore its impact, and to delegate to the head of planning to engage with the applicant in order to identify whether the height and location of the mast can be reduced to a more acceptable level. Will that summarise what you're seeking?
Yeah, thanks for that. Spot on, Michael.
John, would you like to comment on those particular points?
I agree with that, Mike. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chair, would you like to comment at this stage, noting obviously that the points I've just raised in response to Councillor Hanson?
Well, I, as Chair, am very keen that we should fulfil all our obligations on time, but providing that this can be fulfilled on time, I'm quite happy to delegate the powers to our planning department, who I do think do their best on all of these applications. But I also see that Councillor Concepcion seems to be indicating again. So Tony, did you want to come in?
Sorry, Chair, no, it wasn't. No, well, I think I've made my point really. I think John's answered it. So I tend to agree with what's being suggested really.
Yeah. So I'm quite happy to delegate this matter to investigate whether we could have a lowered mast.
Thank you, Chair. For purposes of clarity, essentially, the resolution effectively, the Planning Committee is minded to refuse the application on the basis that scale, height and massing and its proximity to adjacent residential properties is unacceptable and have a negative impact on residential amenity, and on such basis the head of planning be requested to engage and negotiate with the applicant to agree a suitable reduction in height and relocation of the mast on the adjacent pavement to an acceptable form. Everyone happy with that?
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. In which case, as long as everyone's voting in favour, I'll go through briefly just to confirm your votes. So, Chair, your vote?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Concepcion?
Great.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Hanson.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McLinden.
Agreed.
And lastly, Councillor Marrat.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's 6 in favour, none against, no abstentions. Therefore, as proposed, that resolution will be applied in relation to this application. Obviously, just before bringing the chair, I'd like to place on record my thanks to yourselves as members of the committee and to officers and members of the public for your patience and forbearance with the various technical issues we had at the start of proceedings. So your patience is very much appreciated, and thank you on behalf of the City Council.
And I'd like to thank everybody who's attended today and agree with our committee clerk that I'd like to especially thank people for their patience. But I think you would agree that it's reasonable after we assemble so many people, busy people together for a meeting, it's quite important that that meeting goes ahead. I do recognise that there are still technical issues with these virtual meetings, but I'm very disappointed that it took so long to resolve the issues today and that we weren't better prepared actually for a problem with the live streaming, because I believe we've had problems with live streaming before, and I would urge that we try to anticipate these and deal with them in a more timely fashion. So thank you everybody, and hopefully I'll see you back here in a fortnight with no technical difficulties. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask members to formally leave the meeting now, and ask my colleague to cease the live streaming proceedings. Thank you to